One review connects them all. Let's talk about Crime 101.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing or debating Crime 101. But before we get into that, you already know what time it is, movie recommendation time. I don't know why I was so late to the party with this. I found a series. Actually, it was just recently added to Netflix, but it's a series called Animal Kingdom. Bro, when I tell you I am so late to the party, it's absolutely crazy because I think the final episode was in 2022. This series is mad. It's literally about a guy named Joshua, I believe, and his mother dies from OD, and then he moves into his grandmother's house, and obviously she's got sons, and basically they're like a criminal organization, criminal family, criminal clan. But he's like a good boy. He's a good student. Some of them kind of force him in the life of crime. And then, yeah, it just goes. I'm on like episode 4, so I don't know where it goes, but so far it's very interesting. I would definitely recommend you guys to go and watch this. I don't know how I'm so late to this, but it's amazing.
Do I have a best things to watch? I mean, we're kind of planning to discuss Night of the Seven Kingdoms at some point, and that's kind of one of the only things that I kind of got to watch. So I had the fun task of being single dad all week because my partner was like traveling for work. Was in Germany actually. Funny thing, this is going to be a complete sidetrack, and it's now on the podcast. But she got stopped at a German airport because they thought that she had a knife in her bag. So they kind of like emptied all of her stuff out of her bag, checked for secret compartments, everything, and didn't find anything, of course, because she clearly wasn't traveling from Bremen back to London with a knife in a bag. And then the only excuse they gave was that there was 2 objects that were next to each other and it made it look like a knife in the bag. So that's for Daniel, because Daniel hates traveling to Germany because it's just incompetent.
They always look for bombs in my shoes, and they never find any. I'm thinking of actually just putting some there next time, just to be polite. Like they have this whole thing where they kind of take swabs and they run it through an analyzer to look for traces of explosives. And it's apparently the types of shoes I'm wearing, but it's every time. So like you never know what's going to set it off.
Yeah, that would be so annoying. I just thought you'd like that because you kind of always gone about your trips back and forth from Germany. But yeah, I mean, with that, I kind of didn't watch too much this week outside of Night of the Seven Kingdoms. So I'll kind of hand over to Dan.
Any children's shows you've been enjoying? Like surely you're watching stuff with the kid.
Oh, it's like all like nursery rhymes and like nursery songs and stuff like that. That's just ingrained in my head. Or like Gracie's Corner for anyone that has kids, or like Miss Rachel and stuff like that. So mainly like Rolls on the Bus or Peter Rabbit had a fly up on his nose.
Okay, I'll put that down as your recommendation for the week. All right, so this week I watched Dick, which is a 1999 alternate history comedy movie. So the idea is essentially it's set in 1972 during the time of the Watergate scandal. These 2 teenage girls who happen to be in the Watergate hotel when it all goes down witness the break-in that's kind of tied to the Watergate scandal. They are completely politically uninterested. They can't believe that the government would do such a thing or would ever lie to them. And so they kind of just get drawn into the Watergate scandal. And when President Nixon kind of figures out that they know something, he tries to find out what it is, and it turns out to be nothing, but he doesn't know this. And so he makes them his unofficial dog walkers so that he can keep a tab on them. And that's how they get drawn into the Nixon White House. And that's kind of where they start learning how the sausage gets made. And they kind of go through this awakening where they kind of realize how the world works. And the entire thing is like a metaphor for how the American public changed its relationship with the government during kind of the Watergate and Vietnam War era, where before that, a lot of people just implicitly trusted the government. And after that, people were much more suspicious of what the government was up to. And that kind of plays out in kind of the story of these 2 teenage girls who end up becoming Deep Throat because they prank call the newspaper where Woodward and Bernstein work. It kind of escalates into them feeding the journalists information that ends up taking down the Nixon White House. But it started as a prank and they don't even know what they're doing. And over time, they kind of slot into this role of Deep Throat, whose identity at the time was not known. Like that person's identity was revealed sometime after 1999, after this movie was made. So this entire thing is just a very silly, very stupid, very funny kind of send up of this whole topic of Watergate and Nixon and trust in government and kind of the naivete that at least these characters bring to that topic. It's one of those movies that it just has a quirky premise and just completely runs with it. And also it actually did its research, because there's a bunch of details in here that I think the more you know the history of kind of that era and of the Watergate scandal and the Nixon presidency, the more jokes you find. And there's like little things in here, like there's like a rumor that Nixon's dog hated him. And so that is worked into the movie, and that is why they kind of become the dog walkers, because the dog hates Nixon but likes like these two girls. It weaves a lot of historical facts into this really stupid premise, and then it runs with the premise as far as it will go. So it's a very unique and distinctive and quirky movie, and I'm glad I watched it. And I can like, if somebody just wants to watch something a little bit out there and something that just takes its silly idea very seriously, I think Dick is absolutely a contender.
Okay. Well, looks like it's time for the main event. Crime 101. Danny G, please give us your wonderful synopsises.
So, Crime 101 is a crime thriller movie, sort of, that follows the story of three people who are involved in the world of art heists. You've got Mike, who is a jewel thief, who is extremely good at pulling off jewel heists. We've got Lou, who is the detective who is trying to catch Mike. And then we've got Sharon, who works for an insurance broker whose clients are being hit by Mike. Those three kind of become entangled with each other as they kind of try to achieve their various goals, and their lives and stories become entangled. Before we go into our overall impressions, I think one of the things that needs to be said about this is that this is not a heist movie. If you watch the trailer, or even if you just look at how it's being presented, it comes across as a heist movie, but it's really not. Like, the actual heists in this are a very small part. This is very much a character-focused drama that kind of uses kind of the jewel heists kind of as a framing device or as a setup. But it's really about these three people and their life choices that they make. So what did we think of Crime 101?
I really like this film. Even though the ending felt a bit rushed and unfinished, for me, it just felt grounded in terms of its realism, especially the way, just, the rules, for example, the main character set for himself. It had the right amount of action, pacing, I think it was just right.
I see what they were trying to go for. I respect the attempt at trying to give the characters a little bit more flavor to them, but I don't know. I feel like I'm like opposite. I feel like I'm somewhat in the minority as well, because I've seen like this get so many like positive reviews, and actually, this kind of came out of nowhere, and it was like the positive reviews was like, oh, actually, like, this might be worthwhile seeing, because it kind of at first looked like a Netflix movie, or kind of like straight to streaming movie. So I kind of went in hopeful, but all of the character focus and stuff, it just wasn't, for me anyways, it wasn't compelling. It wasn't that interesting. It kind of didn't really, for the most part, go anywhere that I found, really interesting at all. And with the movie being like 2 hours and like however many minutes, I really felt like they could have kind of cut time in a few places. I kind of found myself a little bit bored with some of it as well. Mike as a character, you don't really learn a lot about him throughout the whole movie. You kind of like, don't get too much. There's like this whole element of like, this like romantic interest that he has. And even within that, you still don't get like much information apart from like, oh, he was poor as a child. And that's kind of it. He kind of grew up a little bit rough, and it's like it's nothing interesting. It's nothing unique. It's nothing different. And even with that, even with it being things that you already like expect, it doesn't do it in an interesting way at all. There is an element of like Mike and the police officer and like some type of parallel within their lives, and I haven't quite like put the dots together on that like too well. But I think overall it tries to do the right things, but for me it just doesn't work, or seeing it the right ways.
Yeah, I think I'm much more positive on this one. I think it's just really slickly produced. It looks good. It's well acted. I think the pacing, for the most part, is really good. I think you could probably trim it a little bit, but I don't think very many scenes drag or are pointless or anything like this. I think it's just a really solidly well made movie. The biggest thing that I got out of this movie was like I said in the synopsis, it's not a heist movie. This is not about Mike pulling off the big heist. The heist is very much window dressing and setup, and puts these characters' journeys in motion and kind of motivates what they do, but it's not the point of the movie. The point of the movie is three characters who are orbiting this thematic space surrounding things like risks and doing what it takes and what you're trying to achieve, like, or with your life, right? Or what constitutes success. Those three characters are different expressions and triangulations of those ideas. Their reactions to events and the choices they make and how they react to what happens is an expression of their take on those themes. And I always like it when a movie like does this, and I think this does it really well. I do think the ending is a little bit of a question mark, where I'm not entirely sure that it's actually the payoff to what was set up throughout the movie. Just watching characters react to changing circumstances and what choices they make and how and why they do what they do. I think that's really the movie's strong suit, and that's the part I really enjoyed quite a bit, even though most of it had very little to do with heists or committing crimes or anything like this. The reviews are very high. Like last time I checked, Rotten Tomatoes is in the high 80s in both categories. So it's not like anybody is being burnt by this. But I did walk into it with the wrong expectations, thinking this was Chris Hemsworth pulling off heists for 2 hours. And that's not what it is. If that's what you want, you're not going to get very much of that. You get a little bit in the beginning, but not too much. The bulk of the movie is like a very introspective, character-focused story about people making choices. And you understand why they make those choices and what happens because of that and so on. And that is just not what the movie promised, but I do think it is quite good. Let's talk about it.
I think you kind of, what's the saying? Hit the head on the something, hit the nail on the coffin or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, with the film not being about heists, and it's definitely character focus. For me, what I got out of it was that the point of when to walk away. Obviously, that is repeated a couple of times, and obviously, Halle Berry's in terms of her job, in terms of when is it time for you to walk away, and obviously with Chris Hemsworth's character, when is it time to walk away when it comes to how much money is enough money. This is definitely a film where I think it wasn't a build up to a heist, but it was more of a build up to obviously the resolution that they were going to come to in their stories. So for you guys, what did you kind of get out of each character's story? Like, for example, Chris Hemsworth's character, then you got Detective Lou's character, and yeah, Halle Berry's. I think those were obviously the main three. So for you, did it work in this film?
I'll let you guys answer first because I seem to be kind of like one of the few that didn't quite enjoy it. So I kind of like want to hear what you guys got out of the characters that I didn't.
I think Mike is very much the person who is working towards a very specific goal, right? Like he's not really interested in being rich. He's not really interested in being successful or famous or anything like this. He just wants a certain type of life that is free from risk and danger. And he wants to have kind of the safety that comes with having a certain amount of money. But it does not seem to me like he wants like an extravagant life out of it, right? He does not want to live in a mansion or have a private jet or anything like this. He just wants the security of I can never lose this, and I will be safe and I will be okay for the rest of my life. And that is because he comes from an orphan background where he was taken in by this foster mother who clearly has been taking in various children and raised them and done a good job with it. And she seems to be a good person. But it taught Mike this idea that life is full of risk and danger and you could lose it all at any moment. And the goal in life is to be at the point where that is no longer something you have to be afraid of. And then that is contrasted with Sharon, whose business is risk and her ambition to make partner. For her, the goal is the journey, right? Like the only thing she really cares about is getting this promotion that she's been denied, even though she's been doing good work and all of that. She doesn't really want anything outside of reaching that goal. Right? She already has a nice life. She's already making lots of money. She could do pretty much anything she wanted, but she doesn't consider herself as having arrived and having succeeded until she gets that promotion, because that's the target, and the target is the only thing that matters. So these two, I think, are very similar in that way, and how they approach their work is kind of reflected by this, right? And they approach that work in different ways, because Mike views it as just a means to an end. He does not actually care about what he's doing. he wants to get out of it as soon as possible, and he has a number in mind, and once he reaches the number, he's done. That is why he does not take any foolish risks. That is why he has all these rules about not using violence and about being so careful about how he pulls off the heist so that he gets the money at minimum risk. And that is why he reacts so negatively to things going wrong, or his handler going off script in a way. Like this was one instance where he turns down a job and then he gives the job to somebody else. And on some level, it seems weird that Mike is so upset about this because he turned down the job. So of course, the job then goes to somebody else. But to him, this loss of control and loss of predictability and this volatility that is being introduced into his life because a job that he would have done was now done by somebody less skilled and less careful than him, and that introduces risk into his life because the detective kind of connects the two, right? So Mike's entire thing is get to the finish line and take no risks along the way, whereas Sharon is more about get to the finish line and do what you need to do and fully commit to getting to that point. But she doesn't have this safety consciousness that Mike has, which is ironic because assessing risk is her business, right? But she seems to have no appreciation for the actual risk to her because she's been doing this job for 11 years and she's been promised promotions that never come, and she never incorporates that into her decision making. And it seems to come as a shock to her when she is turned down yet again, which seems to be fully predictable, and she doesn't have a plan B. Like, she completely panics when her goal moves out of sight. Like, as I was watching it, I was kind of thinking, like, shouldn't you have your CV ready to apply to like 4 competitors of your firm and take your customer? Like, she kind of threatens to do this, but she's clearly bluffing. She doesn't actually want to do that because in her mind there is no alternative to achieving the goal. Like, there's no plan B. So I do find it interesting how these two characters are constructed to be completely different on the surface in terms of how they work and what they do and how they live their lives, when really they are trying to achieve the same thing, but in very different ways. And they respond to deviations from the plan in very different ways as well. Like, about half the movie is just those two characters kind of circling each other in terms of how they deal with these ideas. And I think that's quite well done.
It seems like because they play off each other well, it kind of goes up in your estimations where, I don't know, for me, is there just isn't anything new to, someone like Halle Berry's character story, where it's like, the jaded employee who clearly gets overlooked, and, because she's a woman, there's like another woman that steps in and like is a rival to sort of that promotion in the way that she's been doing. It didn't feel as profound to me when I was kind of watching it. I was like, oh yeah, like it's kind of just like playing out the way that it did, and kind of on mic. One, and you kind of said, and it's probably like you probably didn't mean it in that way, but like he is taking a level of risk in doing the type of work that he is doing, because he kind of like runs the risk of being caught and runs the risk of incarceration and stuff like that, even though he like meticulously plans it, so like he kind of minimizes those elements of like getting caught and like and all of that. So there is still like an element of risk in there, but this idea that he's like working towards a number, which is fair, and obviously kind of like puts that over some of the relationship aspect that he's kind of developing with his love interest in this movie. But again, I feel like the movie focuses on this stuff a lot, but for me, I just don't feel like I get enough out of it to kind of warrant the length of the movie. And for me, something like Sinners is kind of compared to like one of my favorite movies from last year. In Sinners, it was very subtle in the way that it was like starting to like build out the image of the characters, and sort of the way that like Smoke, for example, interacted with the little girl and like getting her to like bargain and stuff like that. It kind of shows like certain traits, and like when he was like paying for like the people that he shot to kind of get looked after, it kind of like gave off like certain traits of those characters. And like I don't know, I was like looking at the way that they were building out Mike specifically in this, because he's kind of like the main person in this, and I didn't really feel like I was getting much more than just like the surface level out of like who he really was and like what his character was really about.
And that's where I disagree. I think you're right that this is not revolutionary in any way, but I do think it is specific and it is different from what you would expect. Like, did you expect to get this kind of story when you walked into the movie?
I don't think I did, and that's kind of why I said at the top of my review is that I commend them for what they were trying to do, because I know it was a lot more character focused, and like they had these ideas for these characters and tried to like flesh them out a little bit more. And there clearly is like ideas in what they were trying to do and like how the different characters relate to each other. And that's why like things that I like is like, when they're kind of like showing the morning routine, at the start of the movie and also at the end of the movie, between like the police officer and Mike, for example, and how like different they start from the start of the movie to kind of like how similar they are like at the end of the movie. Things like that. I really like that they were trying to do it, but it just didn't connect with me for whatever reason. And these are the stuff that I actually really like in movies, is when they are a little bit more character focused, when they kind of explore the characters a little bit more. But for whatever reason, it just didn't connect.
And that's fair, but I do think it's there. And I think there's a lot of detail in this. First of all, I do agree that the movie is too long. You could have cut 20, 30 minutes out of this and still made its point. I do think a lot of the pieces that are seemingly random or weird, or where it's not immediately clear why they're there, by the end of the movie, I think they've all kind of slotted into place, and we kind of understand why they do stuff like this, right? So, like with Mike, the fact that like at some point, I think Sharon, when she thinks they're on a date, she says something about how I forget now if it's Sharon or Maya, but one of them says how well groomed Mike is, and that's not just about Chris Hemsworth being handsome, right? Like this is about Mike trying to control every aspect of his life, and specifically because of how dangerous his work is, and one mistake can ruin it all, and that is why he has to control every aspect of it. And that is kind of why when he pulls off this diamond heist and this guy has a second gun that he's not supposed to have, and he narrowly misses Mike, and Mike kind of gets grazed by the bullet, and a little bit of blood falls onto the onto the seat. That is enough to take him down, right? Because that's how the police find him.
That's a contradiction to what it was like as well, because seemingly he knew it. He knew that like the bullet grazed him and there was blood and there was possibly DNA, and didn't do anything about the car. It kind of goes against like his character and how what he's portrayed to be like in the movie.
Yeah, and I think that's because it wasn't part of the plan. It's because he's visibly shaken that it went down like this. Like he's not very good at adapting. Like I have a feeling like Sharon is much better at adapting. When the client is not what she expects or asks something of her that she didn't expect, she can roll with it. Mike does not roll with anything. He has to prepare for it.
He doesn't realize that he's been hit until he gets back to his apartment, and then he sees the blood. And at that point, he has like enough time. And this is kind of nitpicking in it because it's not like major in it, but it's just like I think more of like an oversight or more of like a convenience, so that like the police officer can like identify who he is in the movie. Because I do feel like after he's gone back home, seeing that he had bled and realized that there's potentially blood in the car, there's more than enough time for him to like come up with a new plan to actually, get rid of the car and get rid of the evidence, which he would do.
It's possible, but you could also say it's too dangerous to go back to the car. If he tries, the police might catch him. And so he's better off taking the chances, I think. But like there's little things like he picks up every hair he sheds in that same scene where he discovers the blood, right? And he disposes of all of it, and he makes sure that there's no traces left. In general, he is very meticulous, and in general, he tries to cover every angle, but he doesn't improvise well. I think that's the key part here. That's the character moment, or that's the character trait that's at play here. You might say, why does he not go back to the car? Why does he not just try to drive it into a river once he realizes that there's blood there and he can't be sure that he got all of it, or like something like this? And I think the answer is he's not good at improv. He's great at planning. He's terrible at improvising. And I'm not sure how explicit it is made throughout the movie, but I don't think he ever really is comfortable with uncertainty. And he's ever really comfortable with changing a plan. And I think that is because his entire philosophy is try to do what you can to cover all your bases and don't leave anything up to chance. And then inevitably something does go wrong. And that is when he can't adapt. I think that's just his character. And that's not so much a logic problem as it is a character flaw. And he acts in accordance with that character flaw, I think.
On his relationship, how much did that add to his character? Because I felt like that was there to kind of like add a little bit of like heart and emotion to kind of like the movie. But overall, again, like that's like another part where I was like, I don't know. I don't see like anything kind of profound going on there.
Yeah, that was, I think, the scene that I was least interested in, because I'm here to watch a heist movie. I'm like at that point, I'm in. I want to see a heist go down. I don't want to see somebody go on awkward dates. I did not have a great time with those scenes, but in hindsight, that is where Mike has to be normal, and we see how bad he is at it, and all the things that Maya kind of discovers about him and kind of calls out and challenges, are things that speak to who Mike is, because he's not the kind of guy who is very expressive, right? Like just by himself, he's very reserved and generic. He's just a guy in a suit. But it's through Maya's eyes that we see his personality and his flaws. Like this whole thing about when she asks him about his favorite music, he has no answer. Right? He's just stumped by it. He doesn't even have like a standard boilerplate answer because he goes on so few dates that he doesn't have a playbook for that. Those scenes reveal more about who Mike is than he does himself. And that's why they're there.
One thing I would say it wasn't a necessity, because there are certain characters that are just introduced that way in terms of just their character. They don't, what I'm trying to say, they don't need like a backstory in terms of why they are the way that they are in the present tense. But with his character, I was kind of like for some reason I did want to kind of like know a bit more as to why he was that way, though, like a robot, because there wasn't really much. Because there's like at least like a line, for example, like I remember like Sinners, for example, that's the first thing that came to my head because Hervey mentioned it. But like with Sinners, even though we didn't have like a full backstory of the twins, there was still like a line that gave us like an insight of their upbringing, so that kind of helps you rationale why they are the way that they are now. So I kind of wanted like just a line in terms of why his character was the way that he was. Because, for example, aesthetically, Chris Hemsworth, you know what I'm saying, he could get girls. So I just wanted like a line at least to just give a bit more in terms of like his upbringing or just his backstory to kind of help me resonate more with his character and understand a bit more of his character.
I do think we get a bunch of stuff. So Maya figures a lot about him out, like what kind of person he is today. And then the detective figures out a lot about his past. And once those two things come together, you start getting a picture. And like Mike being so reserved and so awkward is like he's awkward because he's not around people very much. He's not around people very much because people are risk and people are a distraction from the mission. And he is so reserved because he's constantly avoiding risk. He's avoiding unintended consequences and reactions. Like those are his two big character traits.
But the only thing that I pretty much got was that he came from a poor background. So pretty much the information that I was looking for was why he was still like set on having strict rules. So for example, crime 101. I do get why you don't want violence during your heist, because obviously that attracts attention. But just the whole rule base, why you sort of set on dead on rules. Was there anything in his history that was revealed that kind of links into that?
I think you kind of like touched on his foster home like upbringing, but then he also kind of like shares a photo with Maya at the end of like him, which looks like his brothers. Was it the same house? I don't know if it was the same house. To me it seemed like it was like different. It seemed like it was actually with his like real brothers, but then also grew up in like the foster home, so it was like, you know, more questions than anything.
Those are his foster brothers, I assumed.
I took it as like his real brothers, but I think you're probably right in terms of it. It probably was his foster brothers. For me, anyways, it's like, okay, like, you know, you want to get rich, but you grew up in a foster home, and like, yeah, there's like negative connotations, but I don't know. I feel like there was like more meat on the bones that could have been pulled from that in various subtle ways throughout the movie, to kind of, like Jonathan mentioned about, you know, his whole code of like no violence, his idea of like, you know, what the perfect number is for him to retire and stuff like that. It's like, how did like all of those experiences in your foster home shape that? Because like people could have varying experiences in a foster home. What was your story? Like, what was your experience of it? What was your story? That means that, one, the way that you are in terms of like reserved, shy, etc., kind of like shy away from humans, and then two, have this kind of like code of conduct, this rule book to do things the way that you do it.
My impression was that he did not have a terrible childhood. Like it seems to be, at least his foster mother seemed to be a good person who was doing the best she could, and it wasn't like an abusive home or anything like this. But I think one thing that it taught him was how precarious life is, where anything could be taken away from you at any moment. And things are broadly not under your control. And that is why he craves control. And that is why he wants to get to a point where his life cannot be taken away from him anymore. I don't think it's very explicitly stated anywhere, but I think what the detective finds out about his childhood, and if you compare that to how he behaves, I think there's absolutely a sense there that he craves stability and he craves predictability. And I think that is, I forget now if the detective ever says he was in and out of several foster homes because before he ended up with his final one. But if he was, then that's the kind of life experience that would lead somebody to crave stability, I think. I think he even says something at that point that stability is ultimately what he wants. And that is kind of what the magic number is about. That's the bottom floor. That's when he's safe. That's when life cannot throw anything at him to put him back into a place where he's desperate again. And I think that's what that is.
That makes sense. But speaking on the detective, did you guys actually think like he was a good detective? Or like, for example, the whole hunch with the Pacific coastline robberies. Did you feel like that was actually smart police work, or that was just movie magic luck that you got that? Was it build up to it to that very moment from what you saw? Make you believe like, okay, getting to that decision is believable because he is actually a good cop, or was he just like a predator on the hunt for a high, for example?
So I think the detective is a little bit of a washed up screw up, but he seems to be doing proper police work in this, and his entire department is trying to stop him. So his whole thing about trying to find a pattern and linking different crimes that all fit the same criteria, which points towards it having been committed by the same person, that seems to be like pretty standard police work to me. And there's another scene where he basically says, okay, we lost sight of him in this area. It's like 30 blocks. And somewhere in between, he changes cars. And so let's check every garage in those 30 blocks. And his partner looks at him like he's crazy. But that sounds like pretty standard police work to me. You get your lead and then you start knocking on doors. And that's when you check everything until you find the next lead. A lot of the things that he got crap for seem to me like pretty decent police work. Like he's terrible at selling it and he's terrible at playing the office politics. But in terms of actually doing the investigation, it seems to me like he's doing what he's supposed to.
It definitely does seem like everyone around him is careless. To be fair, I do think there is some realism when it comes to just the way that the police was conveyed. I think there was one scene, or there was two, but there was one scene in particular where something around why does this one case matter to you, or there was just something I completely forgot what it was, but for me I was like, okay, this does feel real. And also there was another one where the whole, when his police officer, his colleague, took the gun out of the one bank robber's bag, and then he said, "You do one for the team," or something like that, of pretty much don't snitch on your colleague. Obviously, that was realism in that as well. So I do agree that was definitely scenes like that. It does add justification to him actually being a good cop in the film.
His captain admonishes him because he's pulling down the stats for the entire department.
Yes.
They're being evaluated on their success rates. And because Lou cares so much about getting the guy and not about ticking boxes and closing cases, just for the sake of closing them, he's pulling down the statistics, and that is hurting everybody. And then there's the other thing where there's like a bank robbery going wrong, and they plant a gun on the guy so that in the report they can write that he had a gun or was holding a gun, as opposed to just having it in his bag, because that justifies the shooting. Because now the cop was acting in self-defense, which is like, it's not even really police brutality. It's more like he shot when he shouldn't have. Like they told him to stop, and the guy started running, and so the cop panicked and shot him. That's kind of what happened there. And I think that, like, the way that ties in thematically with everything is that Mike and Sharon care about reaching their goal, and Lou cares about the principle. He cares about doing it properly, and that is what hurts him, and that is why he struggles. Whereas Mike and Sharon are more successful, but they don't know how to adapt when the goal changes or when something comes up that gets in the way between them and the goal. Whereas Lou is just muddling through the entire time. He just responds to whatever is put in front of him at the moment, and he tries to do what seems like a good idea at the time. And that's what hurts him. That is why he's a bad cop in a professional sense or in a technical sense, because he doesn't meet his performance indicators the way he's supposed to, but he actually cares about getting the guy and solving the crime. That is kind of the difference between him and the others, both in terms of the other cops and also the other two main characters.
Unlike Mike and the police officer, so again, I kind of touched on like the morning routine and how, kind of at the start you kind of like see Mike, and this kind of ties into the end of the movie and like, how the whole final heist plays out as well, actually. But you kind of see like, again, like Mike is like, very meticulous, very detail orientated about like his like routine and how he's like preparing for the heist that he's about to commit that morning. Whereas like the police officer, I forget his name, is a little bit more like kind of like groggy, no real structure to his day, and then you kind of like fast forward it to the end of the movie, and it's almost identical, the same thing that they're doing, even to, to the point where he's actually put on a suit, like kind of similar to what Mike is. And there's like almost like, and I it hasn't quite like developed properly in my head, like what that actually means, but it kind of leads to the moment where the police officer actually switches out. The one lets Mike go in that scenario, so kind of goes against what he's been about the whole movie and about principle and getting the right guy and whatever, and actually does what the other police officers had been doing, is like just kind of filling a quota. But then two, switching out the real diamonds with the fake diamonds, and then giving it to Halle Berry's character. What did you kind of see going on there between like how they start to mirror each other ultimately towards the end of the movie, and how the police officer ultimately became like Mike in terms of like being a jewel thief?
We talked about the main theme of risk, right? And the other big theme is doing what it takes. I do think that Lou kind of gives up at that point, where he kind of realizes how messed up this entire thing is and how pointless it all is and how there's no real benefit to him arresting Mike. I'll be honest, when I watched it, I was a little bit confused why all of this was happening. But I do think kind of the intention here is they all kind of give up what they wanted, right? So Mike does not get the big heist in the end, right? Or at least he walks away from the big heist so that he can survive. Sharon walks away from her career and compromises all her rules and all her principles for the payday, which doesn't work out. And then Lou has been ruining his life and his marriage and his career so that he can do the right thing. And then he gives up on doing the right thing in the end. And so they basically all kind of sell out in the end. It's various versions of selling out, right? Because Mike giving this car to Lou and Mike giving the diamonds to Sharon, everybody kind of gets what they wanted, but they have to admit defeat in the process. So it's kind of like a pyrrhic victory or like a mixed victory. In that sense, they're better off in the end and they get something valuable, but they have to walk away from what they were trying to achieve and they have to give up all their rules and principles to do it. I think that's the irony at the end. The only thing I wasn't really sure about what the significance of the car is, because Mike is the car guy, right? He talks repeatedly about how much into old cars he is, and I don't think Lou ever does. And so Mike giving the car that he really likes to Lou, who throughout the movie has never really appreciated it, but then appreciates it when he gets it. I don't know, like it's maybe that's him enjoying the benefits of having broken his principles and abandoned his principles, and that in one sense is failure, but it's also success because he walks away with a nice car. I don't know.
I thought there was like a moment when they were driving from the airport and they were like having a conversation where he asks him about like cars, or they have like a conversation about cars or something like along the line that it comes up. And he says something about like a Mustang or something along the lines. I don't know. I might not be remembering correctly.
You're right. They talk about cars, and Mike says he likes the old cars. Lou says he likes new cars, and then Mike gives him one of the old cars. That's kind of what it is.
Okay, then that doesn't quite make sense.
On the one hand, that's pretty much the only thing Mike knows about Lou, right? Like that's the only personal detail he ever got from Lou. So if he's going to give him something valuable, what else is he going to give him other than just money? But at the same time, the reason it didn't really register with me is that I was looking for foreshadowing in Lou's actual character, that he was into cars or that this resonated with what he actually wanted or something he really cared about. And there I wasn't finding it. And so I guess it is just that very fake conversation they have in the car, right? As they're driving to kind of the big handover, which I don't know that works or makes sense. Why does that have value to Lou if it's based on just a fake conversation that they had to kind of trick each other into trusting each other? Or was that Lou being honest and like actually talking about what he actually cared about? I don't know.
Unsure.
All right. Yes, but so the ending, I think, is the part that looked the least clean and the least satisfying to me, and I think it's largely because of that, right? So I think with Mike and with Sharon, it's very clear, but with Lou, not so much. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of, as I was watching it, it just seemed like there was like something there.
Another thing that didn't quite work for me was a lot of what Sharon was doing towards the end, where she seems to have never considered that being in the finance world or in the insurance world as a woman is a tough gig. Has she not noticed this for the last 30 years? And does she not have a plan for that? When this younger woman comes along who gets a lot of the attention, but she will probably also not get the promotion. At least that's kind of the pattern that's being established. Why does she take it so hard? Is this not exactly what she expected to happen? And why was she so fixated on getting this particular promotion in this particular firm? It just didn't ring true to me because, first of all, I think at that level, money talks, right? So if she brings in millions of revenue per year, that it seems like that should just count. And secondly, the idea that she's at the same firm for 11 years and doesn't even have a backup plan, never looks at other firms, never is like job hopping like from one firm to the next in order to advance her career, that makes her look very stupid and naive. And she's not supposed to be that. She's supposed to be smart and experienced and careful and all of this. But like the way that whole thing is written, I don't think really works, because what somebody in her position should do is keep jumping firms every couple of years, getting a little bit of a bump each time. And that's how she eventually gets there. She threatens to quit, and she threatens to take her clients to the competition, but it's an empty bluff, and I don't understand why it's an empty bluff. Why did she not do this 4 years ago?
I think as well, like the element of when she was kind of like being like, oh, you don't have to laugh at his jokes and you don't have to whatever. It's almost like she did that to kind of get to where she was as well. And they didn't seem that there was like any like regret or remorse or like any like reflection on the stuff that she needed to do to kind of get to where she was or whatever.
Yep.
I don't know. It kind of like muddies it in terms of, were you there on merit or did you kind of flirt your way up and then kind of hit a glass ceiling? But then it also seems like she's like competent at what she does as well. So I don't know. I think it's a bit confusing.
Yeah, it's clearly both, right? Like it's implied that when she was younger, that's how she behaved, but that's what it took to get her skills and competence recognized, right? And then eventually, like that runs out, and once she's made the money for the company, she's no longer needed or wanted, right? It's like this was written 30 years ago and hasn't been updated. I think it comes down to her having a plan and her adjusting her strategy to kind of deal with this and take it into account. I don't think it's a personal, like it's a character flaw in her. I think it's just sloppy writing, where it's kind of taken for granted that that is how it works. But I don't know, it's like something out of the 70s or 80s, even, not even the 90s. Like in terms of like the glass ceiling and all of that, right? Like that exists in a lot of firms, clearly. But I don't know, the way it's handled seems very naive and very, very surface level, when her entire strategy should be built around trying to get around it, right, in some way or another. And I think like the movie even mentions all the ways in which she should be doing this, but she doesn't. But it doesn't grow out of a character flaw that she has, like being naive or being loyal or something like this, right? She clearly hates her boss, so why is she so loyal to the firm? Other than being convinced that if she just sticks it out for long enough, she will get that promotion. But there's like all the facts are contrary to that. So it just didn't sing. And as a result, she doesn't come across as very sympathetic. It just seems like she's making a rookie mistake, but she's not a rookie. She's been doing this for 30 years, and so she should know better, but doesn't. But in every other scene, she's really smart and knows what she's doing, and she can handle the obnoxious client, and she knows what she needs to do in all of this, right? She's pretty smart and experienced and resourceful, except in that point. And I think that comes down to the writing and not to her as a character, I don't think.
I will say, like the trait of like staying somewhere for X amount of time and like chasing the promotion kind of does come from the older generation. And I don't know how old she's meant to be in this movie or how old Halle Berry is as a whole.
53, they tell us 6 times.
Oh, okay, yeah. Then she kind of does come from a time of where you kind of stay somewhere for X amount of time, work your way up, get your promotions, and then kind of like land the dream role or whatever. So I kind of half excuse her like naivety of like not updating a CV and not shopping herself around a little bit just because she might be operating well in the new world, but there's still a level of that old school mentality of like what's worked in the past.
Maybe. I think I would have bought it if the boss was less of a jerk about it and less transparent. I realized about 2 minutes in what the deal was. Like even this whole thing about taking the client away from her the minute before she signs them, like any salesperson would put up a fight with that. That's a big deal, right? And she just accepts it, like because it's happened It happens all the time, apparently. I think if the boss had been maybe he's the founder and she's been with the company since the beginning, and so she considers herself part of the founding group, but she really isn't, and they're kind of stringing her along to make her believe that. But they don't even do a good job lying to her. Them handling her seems very transparent and very obvious. So I just don't get why she ever believed them. Instead of just taking what she could get and then switching to another firm once that had run its course. Anyway, but it's the crux of her arc is the problem, right? Like her entire thing, like the reason she abandons all her principles and the reason she kind of starts working with Mike is because she's so upset and offended that they would double cross her, when that's just them acting the way you would expect them to, or any reasonable person would expect them to. That is actually a big deal in the story, and that actually undermines what her arc is and what the point is, right? The two are like from different stories is kind of the problem.
So is it satisfying that she ends up with the real diamonds at the end?
Well, I think the idea is that they won by selling out. In a story about risk and principle and managing risk and having a plan, them just throwing it all away, and that's how they win. I think that's the point, and that's what it's all about. I think that's why it works, because it's kind of the same for all of them, but in different ways. Like the specifics are different for each one of them, but they all kind of do the same thing in the end. And that's because life is just so unfair and the world is so unfair that the only way you can win is by cheating. And that's the moral of the story. To go all the way back to the beginning, you called it a little bit generic and a little bit obvious. And I don't think this is obvious. I don't think, like, this is not really a happy ending in that way, right? Yes, they walk away with a bunch of money, but they have to give up who they were and what they were trying to achieve and what they worked for all these years in order to get it. That's not a happy ending.
When I kind of say that, I think more so the journey that they go on. In terms of how you laid it out, like, that being hard done by your boss, or being like, trying to be a good police officer in a bit of a crooked system, or, someone coming from a poor background, to take the bit of risk. I think all of that kind of is generic. I kind of do agree in terms of like the ending and how it ends up for all of them. I think very well done in terms of like, flipping it on its head, and like they all kind of win, but lose something to win, and actually kind of like,
Yeah.
have a different goal realized. But that's why I am probably a little less positive on the movie as a whole compared to like, everyone else, is that I see that there's these things happening. I see that there's these ideas, but for me, it's like the journey just isn't satisfying, kind of getting to where it needs to get to. And whilst I can admit like the ending is like, quite poetic, it's just like the journey just isn't that satisfying to be on. And like you said, it's like a heist movie with not many heists, or for Mike's character in this anyways, it's, you kind of see, I actually think like a really kind of like well put together heist at the start of the movie, but then he doesn't do much to kind of showcase his skill and showcase his level of competency after that point. And even like the final heist, it was a bit like, surely this wasn't just your plan to kind of like ambush them in the room and then kind of just like I don't know, like tie him up or whatever. It just didn't seem like it was like a well thought out plan towards the end. Also, what is it with people meeting people, especially in the digital age? What is it with people booking meetings with people and apparently not knowing what they look like? Is just like a whole other thing, which they need to figure out how to like actually do that whole trope a little bit better, because it's just not believable that, especially at this level, you want to kind of know who you're dealing with.
When did this happen? Because every time I think Sharon meets somebody, they like she gets a picture of them, and when Mike tries to infiltrate somebody, he also gets like their file and that includes a picture.
No, it's Mark Ruffalo's character. I like the very end. I'm talking about like the very end heist when the client, the obnoxious client that Sharon was trying to win over, is meeting with like the jewelry person, or like the person that's coming with the jewelry, and apparently doesn't know what the person looks like, and Mark Ruffalo just pulls up and pretends to be the guy.
Yeah, maybe. That does not seem to be something that's very well documented. Discretion is kind of a big deal in that line of work, I would say. I don't know. It's debatable.
So yeah, last thoughts. Good film. I don't really have much to say on this besides, just Chris Hemsworth's character just wanting a bit more justification as why he was the way that he was, and also with the ending. The ending I felt like is a bit of a cop out to say, oh, maybe they're building up to a sequel for why certain stories weren't really. They didn't really have an ending to certain story. Like, for example, his forgot the guy's name, but the one that was giving him jobs, for example, he just disappeared. So I don't know what the hell happened to him. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was a sequel, but like I said, it just feels a bit too much of a cop out. Me saying that, it might just be a thing where that's actually the end of the story, and yeah, just for me, didn't really finish too great. But overall, I still had a good time with this, a very good time with this. Enjoyable movie. Character performances were really good. Chris Hemsworth's performance kind of impressed me a lot, to be fair, because I haven't really seen him. For me, I haven't really seen much of his movies besides Four, so I was impressed with the way that he was acting in this. I'm gonna give this one a strong 7 out of 10.
Speaking of disappearing characters, that whole like initial like first like they spend so much time on like that first heist and the fallout from it, and then I don't know how much really kind of feeds into like the overall story apart from like kind of like bringing certain characters together. I think just kind of last thoughts on this. Like I respect the attempt, and I respect that there's a lot more going on in this movie than there are in the majority of movies that we get in today's day and age. And there was clearly a lot of like thought and like craft put into like the characters and how they kind of come together. For me, it just doesn't come together all the way like that well into a satisfying watch overall. But like kind of like the thesis and the themes and like the ideas behind it, I do respect it. I do like it, and I do kind of want more movies to kind of do more things like this. Because again, like I'm a character person first, so I do care. I do like when they try to explore characters or when they try to combine like multiple different sort of characters and stories into like the whole picture. It's just it's kind of good, but a bit of a slog to watch for me, anyways. So with that, I think I'll give it a 6.3 out of 10.
So this movie ticks a lot of my boxes. I like character, I like symmetry, I like theme, and this movie does that. It's very carefully constructed to create these three character journeys that kind of orbit the same ideas but from different angles and go in kind of different directions, and they all kind of come together in the end where they kind of do the same thing, which is win by selling out their principles that they've built their lives around. And the way that unfolds for each one is separate based on what's been established in the movie up to this point. And I like kind of that kind of thing. It kind of ties it up in a neat little bow, and it feels like very carefully constructed and worked out. And I like that. I think more movies should do this, and I think it's really satisfying when it comes together, and I think it does. I think it looks nice. I think it just creates wrong expectations because it presents itself as a heist movie when it's not really. That's really the biggest problem I have with it, and so that's a 5 out of 7, like really solid. And any complaints I have are fairly minor details.
Okay, guys, thank you very much for tuning into today's episode.
If you reach this part of the episode, as always, we appreciate your support. We appreciate you pressing play and just giving us a listen. And as always, if you liked what you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a whole bunch of nonsense, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
All right, guys, thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye bye.